really the way we talk, our mental internal talk, like what we say when we look at ourselves in the mirror, what we say about other people in our head, what we say about ourselves out loud to people, all of that really matters. And you can really create a pure joy life. You can create the life you love just by starting the conversation of what is it that I really, truly desire in my life? Who do I want to surround myself with? Are the people in my life uplifting me and serving me? What kind of podcasts, what kind of food am I eating via podcasts, via media, via television, whatever it is? How can I feed myself nutritious brain food in the form of what I'm listening to and what's uplifting me and making me feel amazing? Welcome to the Pure Joy Podcast. I'm Elena Love, and that was an excerpt from my talk on healing hormones, how to find a natural way to balance your hormones through a natural food diet. I talk a little bit about fasting and cleansing and some of the things I've done to hack my hormones or help me live symptom-free. I hope that by listening to this podcast today, you'll be able to as well do some things that can help really relieve menopausal symptoms. And if you're young and listening to this, this is also really great, just overall hormone balance. Caitlin Louise, who is my co-conspirator on this podcast and my business partner in Pure Joy Planet, is in her 20s and has used many of these ways of hacking hormones as well to relieve her symptoms, which don't have to do with menopause, but just have to do with being a woman who has fluctuating hormones. So I hope you enjoy today's riff about hormone balancing. When I was in my mid-40s, I'd already been into healthy living for probably since I was 35. But in my mid-40s, I started to experience some hormone symptoms, some hormone fluctuations. And some of the things that I experienced in no particular order were night sweats, or should I say night drenches, because I would literally drench the bed. Hot flashes. I didn't get as many of those, but I did get them from time to time. Extreme moodiness. This kind of took me by surprise because after changing my diet and feeling so good most of the time, it was interesting that I started to feel moody again, and it didn't have to do with any other things like yeast or candida that it used to. It hadn't been out to do with hormone fluctuations. Brain fog and mental confusion. Sometimes they call it pregnancy brain, but it's really just associated with hormone fluctuations. Like I said, at any age, whether you're pregnant, you're menopausal, or maybe you're just PMSing. There's a lot of reasons you can go through brain fog and mental confusion. Breast engorgement and tenderness. This happens to women before their menstruation, but it also happens to women as they go through menopause. A lot of times you'll see women, and they call them matronly breasts because their breasts get really engorged after going through menopause because of stuck hormones in the body. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about what I've done to be able to clear that out. Also, extremely painful foot and leg cramps in the middle of the night and sometimes in the day. I had been experiencing, on and off foot cramps for over the years, and I kind of figured out what to do to balance that. But then when I hit menopause, it came back with a vengeance, and it would be something that would wake me up in the middle of the night. So if these are any symptoms that you are currently experiencing, or you know someone who's experiencing them, maybe some of the things I'm going to talk about today will help you. When I began in this menopausal mid-40s, I was already eating really well. Like I said, I was eating a healthy, mostly vegan and raw food diet. And I thought I really should be able to control my symptoms with diet and maybe by eliminating certain foods that I knew could be aggravating to me. If you've heard of the Ayurvedic doshas, there's a dosha called Vata, which those people tend to be thin and run cold. Their bodies run cold. Pittas, which tend to be like muscular, medium build, and their bodies run more on the hot side. And then there's Kapha, who tend to be a little on the heavier side if they do get heavy. They're more mellow, and they seem to be more balanced in general when it comes to hormones or heat control, hot or cold. They seem to be a little more balanced. Since I am a Pitta dosha, which means I go out of balance in the Pitta area, which means heat, that means I think I experienced menopause a little more heavily than maybe other women would because my body tends to run hot anyway. So the first one I want to talk about that I experienced was the night sweats. So they would get so bad, and this is when I was living in Arizona in downtown Tucson, which is one of the hottest places I know in the United States. And so the temperatures could get up to as hot as 115 degrees anyway. And then I started experiencing these night sweats. And what I found is I would wake up drenched in the middle of the night. I mean, we're not talking just like, oh, I'm sweating, but literally soaked from head to toe. My hair would be wet. If I was wearing pajamas, they would be soaked. The bed was like someone had poured literally 2 quarts of water onto the mattress. So I'd wake up, and luckily at that time I was single. So I would just move over to the other side of my queen size bed and get through the rest of the night. But then the funny thing about night sweats is, if you're listening to this and you've never experienced them, you get cold just as quickly as you get hot. So I'd wake up drenched, which would make me cold. So you're sleeping with a sheet, and then you need another blanket. So I would have like 2 to 3 layers on the bed, and I would be waking up fanning myself or waking up chilly and covering myself. So really, it's so interesting when hormones start to fluctuate that you don't really know what they're going to do at any given time. So you kind of just go through it. So I knew at that time that this was really bugging me, and I knew that I could eliminate maybe some foods that I had been eating a little bit more of. The number one thing for me is grains in general. And I've always known since I started eating a raw food diet in 1997 that grains are really pretty much not on the menu for me. If I eat oats, or like I've never eat gluten, but if I eat oats or corn or anything like that, that can make me really hot and overheated in the moment, especially something like buckwheat, which is more of a grass than a grain, but it can still be very heating for me. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just eliminate all grains and I'll start doing my regular fasting, which I have been known over the years to do fasting 2 days a week on green juice, usually like a celery, cucumber, lemon juice with some kale or parsley in it. I started doing that again, and it helped, but I was still getting the night sweats. I eliminated all the grains, and it definitely eased my symptoms. And then I came upon something called dry fasting. Now, dry fasting is not for everyone, and I'm going to talk about this, but just know that I'm talking about my experience, and I'm not really recommending that you do dry fasting, but it's something good to know about. I had read a book on dry fasting by a woman named Tanya Zavasta. I believe it's chapter 9 in her book, covers about dry fasting, where she talked about where she got a tooth abscess, and the abscess got so bad because she ate a bunch of dried mangoes. It was one of those times where she dried a bunch of mangoes and then ate way too many, and her tooth acted up, even though she was already eating a super healthy diet. Sometimes sugar can really aggravate like something in your teeth that could cause an infection. So what she did, because she was Russian and she was reading a lot of information from Russians in the Russian language, not in English, about dry fasting, she decided to give it a try. And 24 hours after she started her dry fast, the tooth abscess had completely dried up and she was fine. From then on, she just went back to her normal eating. She didn't overeat dried mangoes again, or maybe she did, but now she knew what to do. So basically what dry fasting does is you eliminate all water, all liquid, and all food from your diet for a period of 18 to 24 to up to, I've done as long as 72 hours. So up to 3 days of dry fasting. And so what I did is I started playing around with it. And since I was new to it, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was reading a few things on the internet because now there were more things available in English. I just went without food, drink, or anything, and not water either. For the first time I did it, I did 22 hours. And that was when I was living in that house in downtown Tucson. And I remember waking up probably around 3 a.m, so extremely thirsty. And I was out in my kitchen. I made a green juice with my Green Star juicer of like I mentioned, celery, cucumber, parsley, lemon juice, and I was just guzzling it. And it was the best drink I'd ever had. If you've ever done a dry fast or gone for a long length of time without any liquids, you know how exciting it can be to suddenly have liquid, any kind of liquid. So I broke the dry fast with that because I knew it was healthy and it didn't contain sugar, because the whole point of doing a dry fast is to eliminate. Well, for me, I was balancing my hormones, but I was also just cleaning out pathogens. I was cleaning out yeast, mold, and fungus, which most of us have in our body if we've ever lived in a house, because there's just bacteria everywhere. Just exposure in the world, you're going to get exposed to a lot of this. But especially if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, and that doesn't mean just white sugar, but if you're eating a high fruit diet, or you're eating, a lot of carbohydrates in the form of crackers and cookies and snacks and things like that, your body can just become imbalanced. I did this 22-hour dry fast, And I got really excited about it because I felt really good. And I noticed that my meditation got really deeper. I was living alone and I was able to take this time for myself. So I didn't have to work at that time, thank goodness. So it was easy for me to do. So that's why I don't recommend it to everyone. It has to be, you have to do your research before you just start dry fasting. And you need to have time set aside for yourself, because the last thing you want to do is push your body when you're in the middle of a fast that's this extreme. So what I started doing, because that worked so well, and I noticed already my night sweats, like that night I didn't have any, and the next night I didn't have any, because I was experiencing them on a nightly basis. And so I thought, well, there's something to this. So I started doing dry fast, I think like 2 times a week. And I was just playing around and experimenting at that time. Then I started doing it 2 days a week and getting extreme results. I lost weight pretty quickly and I felt really good. I didn't really love the actual dry fasting because you do get quite thirsty and you can't really do a lot. I would find myself laying around a lot, but I really enjoyed the benefits. And lo and behold, all of my menopausal symptoms went away, including the hot flashes, the night sweats. I wasn't really at that time experiencing any of the other symptoms I've mentioned, such as the breast engorgement and the menstrual chaos and the extreme leg cramps. That came later. I would say that didn't start until 2015. I started experiencing some of that. And so the dry fasting really worked. And the longest I went, actually, and this wasn't, at that point, I had already pretty much healed the menopausal symptoms, but I just did it kind of as an experiment. I got up to 6 days of dry fasting. And I'll do a whole nother podcast on cleansing and fasting and some of the things you can do. But it was really fun just to experiment with my body. And I actually have been a biohacker, even though that name wasn't even coined till the 2010s or later. I've been doing it since 1997 when I got into raw foods. I just love experimenting on my body and seeing what happens if I fast, what happens if I dry fast, what happens if I take these different supplements, what happens if I drink only green juice for 3 days or 7 days, or in my case, 3 months is the longest I've gone on juice fasting, which I will talk about, I promise you, in another episode. So just moving on with the fasting, it really does, the dry fasting, it creates a competition with your cells. And so the pathogens in your body start competing with your cells for water, right? So the cells are obviously going to win because they make up your body and they're stronger. So the water's taken away. Think about underneath a house where there's lots of mold growing, possibly, or any place you've found mold growing, even in your clothing, if you leave them too long in the washing machine. What is the common denominator? It's water, right? Like there needs to be moisture for mold to grow. Same with yeast and fungus. So when you do a dry fast, you basically take away their food, all food plus any liquid that they could feed on. And that creates a drying up of chronic conditions, and inflammation or imbalances in the body start to actually go away. And so that's what happened with me. And not only did I reverse menopausal symptoms, but I didn't have any feelings of inflammation. Like sometimes my neck will go out, only usually if I'm eating grains or inflammatory foods, but just everything just started to feel better. My energy just came back to life. And even though I've been eating a super clean, healthy diet for years, what does happen when you clean up your diet, it doesn't mean I got really healthy when I went 100% raw vegan in 1997 and followed that diet. I feel extreme benefits from eating this way. But what happens is the more clean your diet is, then tiny little things that wouldn't have affected you before now start to become more noticeable. So as an example, even though I've given up grains altogether, I can still experience inflammation if I eat too many carbohydrates, even in the form of a sweet potato or a homemade gluten-free cookie that doesn't have grains in it, but maybe has a little bit of coconut sugar. Like I can just notice feelings of imbalance easier than I used to because my body's clean. It's not a bad thing though. Realize that a lot of people that are not experiencing symptoms and they're eating whatever they want may have, and I hope not, I'm not hoping or wishing this on anyone, but may have suddenly breast cancer pops up, or suddenly they get some form of cancer, or suddenly they get a heart attack. And they say this all the time. People are like, oh, well, he was perfectly healthy and then he got a heart attack. And guess what? Sometimes the first symptom of a heart attack is? It's death. So you don't always get a second chance. So that's why I feel like it's really important, if you're listening to this, even if you're not going through menopause right now or any hormone imbalances, to think about cleaning up your diet in any way that you can. And that's really one of the biggest reasons I want to do this podcast. I'm talking about all kinds of topics on this podcast, mainly what gives you joy. But when it comes to your diet, if you can clean up your diet and eliminate some of these unhealthy foods or foods that cause inflammation, the joy will just naturally come through. It's a natural side effect. The energy, the zest for life, the enthusiasm for doing things. Like when I sit down to record a podcast, I'm excited and enthusiastic. I don't think, oh, I have to do this. When you find what you love in life and you're eating a clean diet, it's amazing the magic that can just start to come through. So the longest dry fast I've done is a 6-day dry fast. And I did that with a friend and student I was visiting in Switzerland. Her name is Vivian. And she is actually from the US, but she lives in Switzerland. And I had gone there to do a class, some classes for the Swiss in English, some raw food classes. And while I was there, we decided to start this dry fast together. So I ended up leaving Switzerland and traveling on an airplane, and I got through 6 days of dry fasting. And the reason I'm mentioning it to you guys is because I feel like it's interesting and it might be something you might want to know, like how long have you dry fasted for? So that 6th day, I was planning on going 7 days. That was the goal. And I just was, my spine, I think my spine was really in healing mode. A lot of times healing mode shows up as cramping and painful things in the spine. At least that's what happens for me, like on long cleanses and fast. I notice I tend to get a lot of discomfort in my spinal column. And I think that's just where a lot of bacteria for me hangs out, because those of you guys who know my history know that I was born with candida and I've had a yeast and mold and fungus issue my entire life. And that's why I eat so clean and well. And that's why I'm always just on alert for any symptoms of that, such as eczema or brain fog or any of these things. And it's my goal just to stay as healthy as I can and eat the cleanest I can while still enjoying my life. That's why I call it a flexitarian diet. I don't call it like an extreme vegan diet, because I feel like there's a balance and there's room for everything in life. Like we should enjoy our lives, but we should also figure out what just really doesn't work for me. And what I know really doesn't work for me is grains, especially gluten, which I never ever eat, and alcohol. I just cannot do alcohol. I feel like I'm being poisoned when I drink it, even a glass of wine, and I feel horrible the next day. I did find out that wine is the number one feeder of candida, like feeds off of wine more than it does off anything else. So in my life, it just doesn't work for me. I no judgment what other people are doing, but it's just good to find out what works in your body and what doesn't. So at that point, I knew it was time to end the fast when my spine got super uncomfortable. And it was really amazing and beneficial to do those 6 days to see that I could do it. And, on a spiritual level, what I love about fasting is I feel like it prepares us for anything. Think about if there was something that happened and you got lost out in the wilderness somewhere, maybe camping, or something happened to you. I think about that movie, 148 Hours. I know now, because I've experienced it, I can go at least 6 days or maybe more with no food or water and I'll be fine. Isn't that a great way to mentally prepare yourself in life, to know that you do not need food and water to survive? And it's really, there's a lot of freedom in dry fasting. And again, I'm not trying to convince you to do it. I'm just telling you my experience. I felt like, oh my gosh, I don't have to pee. I don't need to get up to do anything. I don't need water. I don't need food. I don't need to nourish myself in any way. I can just be. And I could meditate more, and my meditations went way deeper and more profound, and just this sense of quiet, calm, and peace. And I will definitely dry fast again. In fact, I'm planning on doing one again this year in 2018. My last dry fast was this Christmas of 2017, a 3-day dry fast. So I will definitely do one again over the holidays. And I like to bookend my fast with a juice fast, like a day of juice fasting the day before and a day of juice fasting the day after, just to really nourish and hydrate my cells. And like I said, I'll do a whole podcast just on cleansing and things like that. And you can also go on purejoyplanet.com and click on courses to find out about like our liver flush and all the benefits of fasting. Let's get back to balancing hormones. So what are some other things I did to... So dry fasting was one, and that really did help relieve them. But then, the years have gone by since then, and I don't always want to be dry fasting. So I had to find other ways to balance the hormones, because I did experience a period of extreme menstrual bleeding. And that was probably at around age 48 or 49 or even 50, somewhere around there. And it was just the kind that just never stops, nonstop. So I decided to try progesterone cream on the recommendation of a friend. And it's just a natural cream that you put on your arm. And I will list that in the show notes. The brand that I'm using right now is called Oma's Natural, and it's a 10% progesterone cream. I actually haven't used it in at least a year, but I do have it on hand in case I need to use it. And I'm not sure why I would use it because I'm not really experiencing any symptoms. And the reason for that is a few of the supplements that I'm taking. I didn't want to do bioidentical hormones. I didn't want to take any supplements. I'm not a pills person. I mean, I do like supplements as in food supplements, as in maybe taking magnesium, which I'll talk about in a minute, or taking certain food supplements in the form of pills. But I don't want to take like these hormones or these other things because I really do believe that our body will find a way to balance itself. I know we're living in a modern world, so sometimes you do have to resort to bioidentical hormones, but the reason for this podcast is maybe just to talk about some things that you can do that you can use bioidentical hormones as a last resort. And that's really the point. Like, do everything you can first and then use medication or whatever it is as a final last resort when you just don't know what else to do. I currently am taking calcium D-glucarate, which when I discovered that, I think that's got to be at least 3 years ago, I was also experiencing, in addition to the hormone fluctuations, the heavy bleeding, and just like I would bleed and then 4 months would go by and then I would have another period. So it's just really off and on and wacky with my hormones. But the other thing I experienced was extreme breast engorgement, which was really hard for me because I was not eating foods that were really inflaming me in any other way other than my breasts grew like 2 sizes and nothing was fitting anymore. And it was really frustrating. And I'd gone to a naturopath and she really just wasn't any help. She charged me a lot of money, kept testing my blood and telling me, oh, this, oh, that. And it was just by happenstance that I discovered, I'm not even sure where I discovered it, but I started taking, maybe it was Caitlin that mentioned it, something called DIM, which is DIM, and that actually has calcium D-glucarate in it, as well as some other things. But then I just went to straight calcium D-glucarate because the DIM really wasn't working for me as well as I would have liked. And this calcium D-glucarate really helped. And I'm going to put a link to the brand I use, which is Thorne, and it's on Amazon. And I use the 500 milligrams, but I take 2 at a time in the morning. And so that means I'm taking 1,000 milligrams a day. And no, I'm not a hormone expert, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on what all's happening in your biology. But I just know from experience that taking this calcium D-glucarate was able to detoxify my liver, and I was able to relieve all of the symptoms of menopause. One, through fasting and cleansing and eating a clean diet, which doesn't include any inflammatory foods. And the other is taking calcium D-glucarate. And then the second supplement I take, and I'm only really taking 3 things right now that I feel support my body in my 50s as I go through this time in my life. The next one is called chasteberry. And it's funny because I had an acupuncturist who recommended it, and she had a little bush in her front yard, and I picked a bunch of them, and I'm like, this is never going to work. How am I going to take these? So I went ahead and ordered a supplement, and all it is pure chasteberry in a capsule. It's dried chasteberry. And it's designed to help balance the hormones, and it can help cool the body down. It's really great with mood support. And this is for women at any age. If you're having PMS or you're just in any cycle of your life, it doesn't have to be in menopause. It's been associated with supporting positive moods, plus feminine reproductive health, with promoting healthy menstrual phase and length, so not too long, not too short, and menstrual regularity, and anything having to do with reproduction. And then it's also, I think this is what really helped me was with the breast discomfort, was it offers support for maintaining, like when women get PMS, they get engorged, tender breasts as well. And it also happens during menopause. So that was able to really help me. And I take the brand by a company called Pure, P-U-R-E, and I found that on Amazon. And I will also put a link to that in the show notes so you guys can check that out. So I take 2 of those every morning along with my calcium D-glucarate. And the reason I take them in the morning and not at night is this was also a recommendation of Caitlin, who's been hacking her hormones for years because, as you know from my last episode, she has experienced Crohn's disease as well as autoimmune. So she's been working with her hormones for years. And so this taking it in the morning is really what I would notice when I would wake up with night sweats. Sometimes was in the middle of the night, but a lot of times it's in the wee hours of the morning. So the hormones are at their strongest in the morning for me. So I take mine in the morning. You can experiment with taking them at night, whatever works for you. I like them in the morning because it's on an empty stomach, and I feel like they're going to be the most effective. And then another side effect of menopause is muscle cramping. And I would get, so I would say off and on over the years, I've experienced muscle cramps, and I would always say, oh yeah, I'm probably low in some mineral like magnesium or potassium or calcium even. But when I went into menopause, I started getting extreme foot cramps, like the kind that would wake you up in the middle of the night and you'd feel like this rock hard lump in the arch of my foot and even in my calf. So now I take magnesium on a regular basis. I take about 8 capsules a day, 4 to 8, depending on the day. If I'm experiencing muscle cramps, I up my intake. If I take too many, though, one of the side effects is what they call disaster pants or loose stools. And it's not really disaster pants. It's just you're just running to the toilet a few more times a day than you normally would be, which maybe for some people could be really helpful if you feel constipated. But you just would want to back off on them. So I take about 4 capsules of the magnesium citrate by the company called Pure a day. And I take those in the morning as well. I do my supplements twice a day in the morning and at night. And I'll do a whole nother episode on the supplements I take. And if you are part of our Love Camp, which is starting soon in October, we do it 4 times a year. So if you miss this one, you can always do the next one. That we talk about supplements in there. We talk a lot about some of the things I'm talking to you about today. So that's kind of my 1-month training where I try and include a lot of information for people that just really want to do a complete lifestyle change. So now I'm happy to say that I'm totally symptom-free. I still take all my supplements and I do fast occasionally. And the one thing I'm super committed to is my diet. Like I said, I avoid all grains. I would say since 2017, since committing to going off grains completely, I have them maybe once every 3 or 4 months. Like I'll be out with a friend and I'll have corn tortillas or something like that at a Mexican restaurant. But I really do find that even with that, I suffer a little bit more. I get a little overheated. I don't sleep as well. I'm just not as happy as a person when I'm eating grains. I practice what I call a flexitarian diet because it's not about being orthorexic. If you haven't heard of that word, it's similar to anorexia, but it's where people are extremely obsessed with diet. And I really don't believe in that either. I believe there's times for flexibility. There's times for just enjoying a night out with people, but also knowing how to kind of counteract that with some of these supplements I mentioned, or maybe doing a juice fast the next day, or, just taking some anti-inflammatory enzymes. I love digestive enzymes, and I also love metabolic enzymes. We carry one we call restorative enzymes, and that'll clean out your cells in your body and help with inflammation and also help with scar tissue. You can just check it out on purejoyplanet.com. The other thing I avoid is vegetable oils. I avoid these like the plague. Sadly, there is a Whole Food in my town here in Bend, but most of their foods that they have in the salad bar contain canola oil. That's the number one oil I avoid. It's from the rapeseed. It's very inflammatory. There's nothing good in it. It causes brain fog. It causes a lot of mental issues such as poor memory function, poor mental cognition, on and on. And if you haven't read the book Grain Brain, or there's another one called Brain Maker, I would highly recommend those because they talk a lot about these oils. And Dr. Mercola's new book called Fat for Fuel, he again talks about a lot of these oils and how they affect the brain and how they affect the body. So you want to avoid canola, corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, any seed oils really. The only oils I eat are coconut oil, cacao oil, also known as cacao butter, which when melted is liquid, avocado, and olive oil. Occasionally I'll have sesame oil if I'm making like an Asian recipe. I love the avocado oil. It has a high flash point, which means you can cook with it. But I really truly believe still, from what I've been hearing from people like Sachin Panda and other fasting experts and other just diet experts, that olive oil is an amazing oil. But make sure that it's truly a pure olive oil. I'm currently buying Biryani olive oil, which I will link as well. And you can just go on biryani.com and find their oil. They press it themselves. They're a company in Sacramento. They're 2 Italian men. And it's super clean. It's stone ground, unfiltered, so it looks kind of cloudy when you get it. It comes in a dark bottle, which is super important. You don't want to buy these olive oils that have been sitting on the store shelves in clear bottles because those lights are on in the store all day long, just blasting into your oil, breaking down the plastic, but also totally disfiguring your oil. Dark glass bottles that are shipped to you directly after pressing. Go ahead and do your research on truly organic 100% olive oil and go down that rabbit hole and kind of find out what's out there. And like I said, Biryani I've been using for years, and it's one of my absolute favorite olive oils. I keep it in the cupboard underneath my blender so it stays in the dark. I do not keep it on my countertop. There's so much for me to cover about health, diet, and lifestyle. I can't go into it today. And just a couple more things about olive oil is it has a large amount of antioxidants, and it's also really nutritious. It's got beneficial fatty acids. It's got a little bit of vitamin E and vitamin K. It's loaded with powerful antioxidants as long as it's cold pressed and in a glass bottle, like I mentioned. It can help fight inflammation, has strong anti-inflammatory properties because chronic inflammation is thought to be the leading driver of disease. That's why I keep talking about inflammation today. My mom has Alzheimer's, so me and my sister are really passionate about anything that's inflammatory because it's directly tied to metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, arthritis, and even obesity. So anything you're eating right now, which is alcohol, grains, inflammatory foods, high carbohydrate foods, are all going to contribute to inflammation. Just something to think about. And that's why we do our ketogenic love camp, and we get everybody off these inflammatory foods and they start feeling amazing within a week. I'm telling you, it's real stuff here. More about olive oil. It may help prevent strokes, according to this article I read. And stroke is caused by a disturbance of blood flow to your brain, either due to a blood clot or bleeding. So again, it always comes back to the anti-inflammatory diet. And it's protective against heart disease because of the inflammation part. It lowers your bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, which happens from oxidation. And it improves the lining of your blood vessels. And it can help prevent excessive blood clotting, according to this article that I read, which I will link in the show notes. Olive oil is also not associated with weight gain or obesity. Usually that has to do with trans fats and people eating a lot of processed foods. On human studies, it indicates that the Mediterranean diet, which is rich in olive oil, is shown to benefit brain function. It also is shown to reduce type 2 diabetes risk, and it can have anti-cancer properties. So have I said enough good stuff about olive oil? Also helps treat rheumatoid arthritis. Fats are not the enemy. And that's why, again, I'll do a whole episode as well on ketogenic diet. We are finding that healthy fats are so amazing for our brain. Our brain is made up of 60% fat. We need healthy fats in our diet. We don't need all these carbohydrates, all these bananas that come from other countries and aren't even native to our land. We need to be eating some fruits like berries and cranberries when they're in season. But to stop eating all these high carbohydrate foods, start eating more healthy fats, and get rid of the grains and see what happens. Maybe your menopausal symptoms will start to subside just from that. I really love talking about these topics. So if you've got some ideas for me, please feel free to email me at purejoyplanet@gmail.com. You can also reply with comments on my podcast. Just go to iTunes. Please give me a rating and review. If you would love to give me a 5-star rating, I would love it. It will help me get more on the map. And also any reviews, any comments you have, anything you want to see more of, I would love to. I'm really loving doing this podcast. I'm loving hearing from you guys. It's been so awesome seeing the feedback. And I'm loving that I get to do this, that I get to do what I love for a living. And that's been by creation and design. Something I'm really into is called law of attraction. There's so much more to it than just law of attraction. Really the way we talk, our mental internal talk, like what we say when we look at ourselves in the mirror, what we say about other people in our head, what we say about ourselves out loud to people, all of that really matters, and you can really create a pure joy life. You can create the life you love just by starting the conversation of what is it that I really, truly desire in my life? Who do I want to surround myself with? Are the people in my life uplifting me and serving me? What kind of podcasts, what kind of food am I eating via podcasts, via media, via television, whatever it is? How can I feed myself nutritious brain food in the form of what I'm listening to and what's uplifting me and making me feel amazing? So I just want to invite you today. One call to action is to eliminate one thing from your diet that is inflammatory. It might be for you, it might be all grains, or it might just be gluten. It might be dairy. It might be inflammatory oils. Maybe go through your cupboards and get rid of something, cookies or something that's your nemesis. And if you really want it, you have to go out and get it. And maybe you just limit it to one time a week. And then eventually you'll limit it to one time a month. Before you know it, it'll be 6 months have gone by and you haven't had that vice food, whatever it is, potato chips or anything fried that's causing inflammation in your brain. Because you only get one chance, one body in this lifetime. And don't you want to be 80 and feeling super spry and lively and not having your kids have to take care of you? I really want that. And that's what I am living for every day. And so I invite you to do the same. And I will see you next time. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Pure Joy podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Elena Love, and I so look forward to bringing this to you every week. Please stay in touch with me by letting me know what you would like to hear about, maybe someone you would love to hear interviewed, or perhaps even yourself. My message is pure joy, but it also includes spirituality, what foods to eat, what things really create a healthy environment on our planet and in your body. And each body is so different. So the more information we can bring to people and the more that we can help just uplift and inspire you to be your absolute best on the planet every day, that means I've done my job. So please tune in next week and every week. And I love you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Remember, for any of my blogs, recipes, information on courses, go to purejoyplanet.com. If you want to see some of the great offerings we have, you can click on our store and find out about our amazing enzymes and supplements and things that help with bloating, and find the amazing nut milk bag. And I'm super excited about that product because it's one of the best bags out there for making your own nut milk. I love bringing you products and information that I feel really make a difference. So keep in touch, and I will see you next week.